Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Welcome back. So I'm going to get started with another project today. It's going to be one of these new Know Me patterns. And I'm going to be making this big wrap dress. And I think it looks cute because it's got these big old pockets that kind of stick out, you know, something different. And it looks like the wrap is substantial enough that it'll cover everything, I'm hoping. And it's got these little epaulette things up on the shoulder. So, you know, lots of detail. So what I am going to be making it out of, hang on a second, I got a little dog down here that wants to come up. Okay, what I'm going to be making it out of primarily is black flannel. I have pre-washed it on hot, pre-dried it on hot. Trust me, it bled a lot, it shrunk a lot, and I want that to happen before I cut into it. But in addition to the black, so like on here, they have two different main colors going on. My main dress is all going to be black, but I am going to be using an accent color for the pockets and the sash and the epaulettes and maybe some trim on the sleeves. And that is this very bright, colorful half-yard piece that I have. I think that's going to be enough for the pockets. We'll see where it goes from there. If I don't have enough for everything I want to make detail out of, I'll grab something else. So let me go ahead, open up my pattern, get started cutting it out. I am going to be cutting out my basic size 16, which I usually do. And the fabric on here, it has it broken down for the amounts that it calls for. So like on here it calls, it's windy weather outside and she's nervous. Okay, on the pattern it calls for 2 7/8 of one color, 2 yards of another color. I have about 6 yards of this flannel, so I should be fine. So let me go ahead, open up the envelope, pull out my pieces and see what we're going to be dealing with. Okay, so before I undo my pattern, I'm looking at the picture here, and I am just going to, with a little pin here, hopefully it works, mark everything that I'm going to be doing in the contrast colors. I'm going to do the band at the bottom of the sleeves, and on the front, I might do the collar in a contrast too, just for funsies, you know. Okay, so I'm going to do this belt. And, you know, put the trim on the sleeves there too. And the other thing I'm thinking of is doing the facings and doing the facing in the contrast. I think that that would be really pretty. And so what that means is that this part of the collar is going to be the contrast also. And you know what? Let's make the whole collar out of the contrast. I like that. So I'm probably going to have to use another piece of contrast in addition to this one. I have a couple that kind of coordinate that I can use. But these pieces, the skirt, the sleeve, and the bodice is all going to be out of black, and all of these out of a contrast. So let me go ahead and get these cut out. I do not see any real fitting going on up here. To me, you know, I have not looked at it yet, but to me it looks like there's no real fitting in the back. I've got some belt loops, and really the fitting what it looks like to me right now up in the front is just the belt cinching things in. The way that this is kind of laying, that's what it looks like to me. So let me go ahead and get these pieces cut out and then start laying it out with my black flannel first. Okay, let me catch you up to where I am right now. So I've got all my pattern pieces cut out, and of this fabric, I have two of my lower sack shaped pockets and their upper part and the gusset cut out. And I also have the undercollar cut out. So I need to get a different piece of a contrast. So I have another one. It's the same design, slightly different colorway, but it's going to be, you know, fine. Lots of fun there that I'm going to be using. But I was looking at this pattern. So here's the thing. I have a mature bust line, okay? And I didn't really realize that these were big old sack pockets up here also. And then when I first bought the pattern, later I did, and I was like, well, I can deal with that. But the more I look at it, the more I'm thinking having big bags on my already, you know, slightly droopy bust line is probably not the look I'm going for. So I think that I'm going to change these pockets and take the gusset out so that the pockets lay flat on the upper part here. You know, these down here, yeah, that's cute down there with the big saddlebag on my saddlebag. You know, I don't know. We're going with it here. But I'm gonna change these upper pockets and not cut out the upper pocket gusset. I'm just gonna put that away because it just seems like it's not gonna be a flattering thing on me, you know? I don't think it's honestly that flattering right here. So I'm making that alteration. If you want to make it and you want to put the gusset in, I'm going to be putting the gusset into these lower ones so you can see how I do it there. You know, it's your design, your pattern. You can do what you want. I'm going to leave that out for mine. So what I still need to cut out then is my upper collar, my upper flap, because I'm still going to do that, my lower pocket, which is up here somewhere, and then I have my facing pieces. I'm pinning on my front facing here, and I wanted to show you the fabric I had. I did not have a piece long enough to cut out my whole facing, you know, because of the size strips that I had, so I pieced it together. So right here, I have a seam, and I just press those selvage seam allowance area flat there. I will deal with that when I'm interfacing all of this, but for right now, you know, I think that the colors are close enough and they're wild enough. I don't think that it's really going to matter that I had to piece that. All right, so I ended up using 3 of my little half-yard contrast pieces here, and I did not have enough to make the belt without cutting into a new piece, and I didn't want to do that. I'll probably just make this belt out of the same black that I am going to use for the flannel for everything else. So I am going to iron that flannel before I cut it out, just because when I washed it, you know, it got all loosey and everything. So if I can iron it now, then it'll make everything match up a lot better while I'm sewing and pressing as I go a little bit later. And, you know, instead of like having to lug 6 yards of flannel over to my ironing board, I am just cutting off a piece that is big enough for me to cut, like, trying to angle my camera here so you can see, 2 of my skirt pieces. So I'm going to take that over to the ironing board, rip this piece off like so, just like that, and iron this one piece, get this skirt cut out, and then go on to the next piece, because too much fabric over there just makes my life a little too difficult. So I'll do that. Then I'll come back and do the other skirt piece. And then hopefully with the other pieces I have, they'll be small enough and the edges that I have cut out from these so that I can manipulate my bodice and sleeve pieces from there. Oh, I did not show you yet. The sleeve piece here is fairly short, okay? And it is at my size, which is a size 16. It does have a sleeve width of 16.5. So it is taking into account a fairly wide flared sleeve. So I'm not going to do any sleeve modifications on this. I think it will fit my sausage arms quite well. All right, so welcome back to another day. What I have here is, my instructions. And the first thing that they are going to ask us to do is put interfacing on several pieces. And I did that off camera while I was thinking about something else. And this is, of course, what I'm using, my typical very lightweight fusible interfacing, okay? Very lightweight stuff because I don't want a big stiff collar. I want a comfy collar, So the only piece that I did not put interfacing on that they are asking for is the sash. The sash is cut out of the black flannel instead of the colored pieces, and I just don't think it's necessary. I'm not going for a super structured wide sash just because, let me look at my picture here, and it's probably just me, just my body and everything, but see how she has it extremely crisp, okay? Mine's not going to be that way. Mine's going to be like a regular tie. It's going to be fairly wide, but a regular tie. Usually when I try to make them really crisp, they end up crinkling anyway. So at this point, I want comfortable. So just letting you see, remember I had to piece together my front facing here. So I just interfaced over it, it's going to hold that. Seam allowance out nice and flat. So there you go. So the first piece that I'm going to be dealing with here is bodice piece number 1. So let me go ahead and grab that out, and I'm going to grab my back piece out too at the same time. Okay, so here's my piece number 1, bodice front. Lots of stuff to mark on here. So I'm going to need to grab a pen that will mark on white. That will mark as white. I'll probably use my chalk pencil. But we have darts, we have dots, we have pockets, lots of things. Center front, which is good to know. There's a buttonhole here. Okay, but just taking it one step at a time, the first thing I'm going to do is move my paper out of the way and clip my notches because I want to clip them while they're still pinned together. And I am clipping in. It's just the way I do it. I'm clipping in about 1/4 inch all the way around here. Okay, and then if you haven't seen before, welcome, welcome. What I do when I have circles to mark is I get a big thick piece of leather here and I stick it under my pattern. I'm doing size 16, so I want to punch out the circles that go along with that size, okay, which is right here. And I have this little tool, which is a leather hole punch, screw type leather hole punch. There is a link in the description. Fabulous little thing for punching out those circles, so then you can just reach through with a pencil or pen, heat erasable pen usually, and mark those on the fabric. Okay, I cannot find my white chalk pencil for some reason, so I am going to use the white heat erasable pen. I like the colored ones a lot better than the white ones because the white doesn't show up as well, Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The red, blue, and black, they work fabulous, but the white one, not quite as much. All right, so at this point, on one side at least, I have all of my little circles marked. And here's the thing with these white heat erasable pens. The longer they sit, the brighter it gets. So when you first draw your circles, they're very faint, but as they dry, they get brighter. It's just a thing with it, So because there's so many dots and so much stuff going on, I'm going to draw my lines on too. I'm going to draw the darts on, which necessarily means that this is going to become the wrong side of my fabric, since I'm going to be seeing the dart here. Okay, but that's okay. So there's that. Now on the pocket, the two top dots on the pocket right here, that's the stitching line for the top flap of my pocket. And remember, I am putting my pocket on. I'm just not putting that extension so it pooches out. Okay, so here's the bottom of the pocket stitching, and up here is going to be the side placement for the pocket. And over here. And I am going to transfer all of these marks over onto the opposite side of this so I have a opposite view, because there's a whole lot of stuff to keep track of here, and it's just easier for me to do it this way. Now the center front, I just put a little mark down here at the bottom just for funsies, just to keep track of it, not saying that you have to. I'm going to go ahead and draw it in with a little dotted line. So I punched a hole and I'm putting a little dot in at the very top. I'm going to grab my little ruler. Dearly love these. They are so handy. If you ever get one, you'll be happy. But I'm just going to put a dotted line here to indicate that this is the center front. Okay, when I iron it, it'll go away. Besides, this is going to be the inside, so all is good. So let me go ahead and transfer all of these markings. I have two layers here together to this side, and then we will get started doing some stay stitching, it looks like. Okay, so looking at their first instruction, first they say reinforce the corner, and then they say stay stitch. Well, to me, just stay stitching is going to reinforce the corner, so no need to do two different steps. But I am going to stay stitch this whole corner. So at 5/8 of an inch, coming through all of these dots, at this dot, be very careful that you make that point exactly, okay? So what I would do is put the needle down at that dot, turn everything, pivot, and so you come up. Make sure you're at 5/8 of an inch, because that is going to be right on the stitching line. If you get a little too big, it's going to show. Usually stay stitching, I do 1/8 of an inch less. So what I'm going to do is, I'll just mark it on here. It'll be easier to show when I mark it. I'm going to do my stay stitching primarily at 1/2 inch. So you can see that the line is going to be this side of all of these dots. So it shouldn't show when I do my main stitching, okay? Let me add some light to the subject. Okay, so if I make this my stay stitching line, which is 1/2 inch seam allowance, this is 5/8, this isn't going to show. But when I get to within about 1 inch of this, I'm going to come over here, aim at that dot exactly. Okay, and then up here, I will also be stay stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so it won't show. But again, when I get to within about 1 inch of this, I will aim at it. Okay, so that's the track I'm going to follow with my stay stitching. Let me go ahead and do that to both sides of both of my fronts, and I will be right back. Once I got my little reinforcement stitches in here, I'm serging around the piece, and I'm going to say I'm going to serge around a lot. So I wanted to show you what I mean. So you can see I'm not really cutting anything off here. I'm just coming close to the edge to keep it nice and neat. And I want to make sure I keep nice corners. So I'm going to go all the way past. This is for an outside corner. I go far enough that my needle passes where the end of the fabric is. Lift the presser foot and turn it, and pop it back down. And then for an inside corner, I can just kind of open it up so it's going to lay flat, or as flat as I can make it. I highly recommend serging around your piece before you sew it together. You can do whatever you want, you know. Everyone can make up their own choices on how they construct their garments. This is just the way that I like to do it. Okay, so at this point, reinforcement stitching in, serging around the edge. I'm going to go ahead and make my pleat. And when we're all done, the pleat's going to get pressed towards the shoulder over here. So I'm going to put my pin down in the first dot, back up in the second dot, pull that together, pinch it down here at the bottom dot. Okay, just smooth that out so I have a nice edge there. Stick a pin at the bottom and one midway here and then up at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this from the outside all the way in on both of my fronts, and then when I press it, I'm going to press this little dart so it's going this way towards the armhole. All right, so since I already showed you my serger of the day, well, my only serger I have up, I'm going to show you the sewing machine of the day is the Free. She is on my treadle cabinet, and she's a lovely little shuttle machine. So I'm going to be using her as I do all the straight stitch part, and then of course, you know, 1980s vintage serger for the rest. Okay, so with that done, we're going to start working on this upper pocket. And the upper pocket is different than the lower pocket. The upper one is pleated. It's an outside pleat, you know, keep an eye on that, because yes, I have put my pleats on the wrong way before on this channel, you know, but you do. Sometimes you make mistakes when you're sewing, and that's okay. It's never the end of the world. It's just fabric. So let me go ahead, punch out these circles down here, get these lines marked, and I am going to try to get all of this marked on the right side of the fabric. It's just very bright, but hopefully this will show up. But I wanted to show you I have drawn, you know, be it ever so lightly on there, my front pleat stitching lines, and then this top fold line. So, since we're going to be skipping this gusset part, when I do the bottom pocket, we'll do gussets then. I'm just going to make this like a traditional pocket. So I need to actually make the front pleat before I make the fold at the top. So I'm just going to fold this in half and pin it. Hang on one second. Pin it here, and these lines should match up on either side at this point. Folding it in half, at least I'm going to assume it does. It looks like it does. I'm going to use this line I drew as a stitching line and just put a row of stitching all the way straight down on both of my pockets. So once I got that seam put in, I went over and pressed the seam allowances open, so it's kind of a little fold on the outside edge. Press that flat, and at 1/4 inch, I just ran some stitching at the top and bottom there. Now when I ironed it, it did erase my heat erasable pen, so even though I technically don't really have to draw this back on, I am. And it will come back. It's just that kind of a thing. And this bottom little dot, I'm going to redraw that. So at this point, let me take a peek at their instructions and see how we're going to put this pocket on. We're just going to turn it under. That is what we're going to do. It's supposed to have nice square edges here. So that's all good. This line here is about 7/8 of an inch down. So we're just going to fold it down this way at that fold line. Okay. And the outside edges, where this dot is, that's going to tell me where the edge needs to be. And they're giving you a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay. So right here at 5/8 of an inch and right here at 5/8 of an inch, I'm going to do a little row of stitching right there on both of my pockets. And this is the top part. But you know what? Before I do that, before I put that stitching in, I am going to go ahead and serge at least this top part because that's going to get a lot of wear going in and out, and I don't want that to fray. So while I'm at my machine, knowing me, I'll go ahead and serge all the way around both pieces because what can it hurt? Okie doke. So now I'm just going to turn my little pockets right side out. I'm not even clipping down there because this fabric is so lightweight. I don't think I need to, but if you're using a thicker fabric, definitely cut those corners, you know. Don't make your life any more difficult than you need to. I'm going to fold this down at the point of my little line that I drew across the top there and get that pressed. And then I'm just going to turn in these sides. See, here's another dot, lining it up to that dot. Same thing here. There's my other dot, so lining it up there. Oh my goodness, I need to move my camera. Sorry about that. Let it cool down a minute. And then through the smoky mist, what you need to do is turn it up again at those dots like this. And I'm just going to press it. If you feel like you need to push it in a little bit so that the outside edge isn't going to show, you know, go for it. I'm not going to work on mitering any of these corners or anything. Again, just because this fabric is so lightweight, I don't think that I really need to for this particular project. But if you do need to, let me get a pair of scissors here. This is a thing from Claire Schaefer's book. If you need to miter it just to take bulk out, what you can do is down here, make a little clip almost to that point and take another one so you have a little wedge cut out of it, okay? And then you're going to match up those two raw edges. Okay, so that way you don't have any extra bulk there. So again, what I did is lean those two edges together like that, and then fold it up. And it's gonna bring it in so that you don't have any of that edge peeking out, you know. That's a really good thing to do if you're using a fat fabric, something with a lot of gusto. With this, you know, not that important, but got a cute little pocket here. So let me go ahead and get the other one turned and pressed in, and then we'll position them on our bodice front. I need to position my pocket on here, and I can actually kind of see where I drew through the fabric. You know, I know that that's kind of cheating, but can you see that with me right there? So I could just pop it on there, but just to make sure, what I'm going to do is flip it over and stick a little pin through each one of those dots, you know, just to make sure I get it right on the money here, as you do. Okay, so now looking at it on the right side, wherever those pins are coming out, that's where the pocket needs to get attached. So I'm going to make sure that I am putting the one with the bigger fold and the side seams on it, that goes up on the top right here. And the other is on the bottom. That looks pretty good. So I'm just going to pin it here, and this is going to be edge stitched on. So once I have it pinned, get these other ones out of the way here. I'm going to be running a nice little edge stitch from this top down, over, and back up to that side. Okay, so I've got my pocket stitched on, and before I go much further, I needed to grab some buttons because there's a button on each pocket flap. And, you know, she's got very wildly extravagant buttons, which is beautiful, but since my fabric itself is going to be pretty crazy, I'm using a more subdued button, just little green buttons. I think that'll work with all of my coloring. So I'm going to go ahead and sew a little button right here in the center part of each one of my pockets, and then that way that is out of the way, plus I'll know what size buttonhole to make on this part here. So let me go ahead and do this. I'm just going to stitch it on by hand, and I'll be right back. So just to get my button started, I want my knot to be hidden, so I'm just going to stick it inside right here so I don't have to look at it. You know, there's nothing wrong with looking at a knot, I just don't feel like it right now. So then I can bring my needle up and, you know, nothing there. So let me go ahead, make a few stitches and sew my little button on right here. It's just going to line up where that seam is on the underside, so that'll give it a lot of reinforcement. So then for the final stitch, I'm going to bring it back up, put it through only below the button. I'm not going all the way through the fabric on the final one. Okay, so it's right there. And you can just wrap the thread around the button a couple times, pull it nice and tight, and I like to stick my needle back through that funky little almost shank type thing I just made. Pull that, and there you go. Okay, they don't usually break like that. Makes me wonder how old this thread is. I didn't think it was that old. Anyway, got my buttons on. It's time to go ahead and start working on this upper flap. So let me see what they want us to do. All right, so my upper flap pieces, they are interfaced. And what I need to do is fold it in half. This fold line is right in the very center. So I'm just going to fold that in half. And there are dots here. I will be aware of that when I flip it right side out. These are 5/8 of an inch in from both sides, so I can easily figure that out, okay? But right now with my little piece, fold it in half, I need to sew here and here at 5/8 of an inch, and be aware that down here at the bottom, I guess I should go ahead and transfer where that circle is, but you're going to go straight to where that circle is and then cut in a little bit. Let me go ahead and draw that on so you can see what I'm talking about. So along this edge, it's at 5/8 of an inch. Where that dot is, right here, right there, just right here, you're going to angle it in a little bit, which is just following the angle of the piece. But that's important because otherwise your little edge here is going to pooch out when you put your final little flap on. So make sure you get that little angle there. Okie doke, so that's what it looks like now. Now I'm going to need to put a buttonhole in, and my little treadle machine that I'm using right now will not work with my buttonholer, so I'm going to probably need to use a different machine just for that. But what I'm going to do is punch out, where is my leather punch? Here you are. On my pattern piece, I'm just going to punch out the very bottom and the very top of where this buttonhole mark is. And where these circles are, that's the corners of my fabric. So if you can see underneath, I'm just lining that up. I'm going to grab, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you weren't centered. Grab a pen here, put a couple little dots that I can then go through and connect, because everything shows up better when there's a line through it. You know, it's the nature of things. So now I'm going to go ahead off camera. I'll just set up another machine, make a buttonhole right there, and then I will be back. And I'm actually feeling a little tired. It's been a long day, so I will probably call this good for the night, and then we will start up again tomorrow. Well, welcome to the next morning. Let me tell you what I've got going on right here. I made my flaps and I ran my buttonholes last night, and I put on my buttonholes with my buttonholer on my Yolanda machine, my FAF 130, and I had the setting wrong. I had it too wide so that there's hardly any room for me to cut down the middle. That was me. I was just too tired. I should not have done that, but it's done now. But here's my thought. I am not going to be putting things in these pockets. These pockets are just for looks. So, you know what I've decided to do is, rather than risk cutting open my buttonhole and having all of that fray and everything, I'm just going to permanently close it up with that button. You know, I'm going to take the button off here and just sew it all the way through there. And I think that that's going to be fine. So let me go ahead and take my buttons off again, and I'll be right back. If I place it so that the very edge of this is touching the top part of my pocket, that is pretty darn close, so I'm going to call that good, and I'm just going to center it here. Okay, so now I have this pinned up here, and the place where I'm going to stitch is right, if I do a connect the dot right here, I'll be able to see that stitching line right there, okay? So that's where I'm going to sew it. Once I have it sewed, I'm going to turn this down and press it so it's down, and then I'm going to permanently sew that button on the flap so it just stays put. Okay, so now that that is done and I have it pressed, and when I ironed it, all of my marks came off back here, you know, which is lovely. I need to put aside my front bodice pieces and grab my back. And it looks like what I need to do right now is, after I serge all the way around each of these pieces, there I am. Okay, so I'll take my pins off, serge all the way around it, and then I'm going to come back and transfer my dots. I'll clip it first, transfer my dots, but I'm going to stay stitch around this edge, which is running a row of straight stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance from the edge. Okay, so now that I have everything marked and serged, I'm going to go ahead and match up my center back. There is a set of notches in the center back, but it should line up really straight. And so it's straight across here at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then press it open. Okay, so now that that is done, pressed open nicely here, I need to sew my backs to my fronts. So I'm going to place them right sides together, matching up my shoulder seams up here, my side seams over here, you know, regular 5/8 inch seam allowance on both sides, and then pressing both seam allowances open. Okay, so with my, you know, bodice kind of done-ish at this point, what the instructions want you to do is skip up and start getting the skirt together and put the skirt on. And I think that it would be easier for me to actually skip ahead, deal with the sleeve while I'm only having a small amount of fabric here to manipulate while I'm sewing my sleeve on, and then after my sleeve is in, go to the skirt. So, of course, I will be, you know, clipping my notches, punching my circles, drawing them in with my heat erasable pen, and serging around the outside edge. That much is understood. But one thing that has me a little bit concerned about the way that they want you to do these sleeves is what they want you to do is turn up 1.25 inches to the inside. Just turn under the raw edge 1/4 inch so you have a narrow hem, and baste it in place and then stitch it from the outside. This is a very circular bottom, okay? And so that means this outside edge is a lot wider than that place up here. You know, we got that much room in. It's gonna need to be condensed quite a bit. And they're not really telling you to put in any way to get that ease put in the instructions. So let me get my pieces all prepped the way I showed you, or I told you just a minute ago, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to get my ease worked into my bottom edge so I can make that turn really easy. Now while I'm marking this, as usual, I want to mark the side that is the back so that I can keep track of it, and the side that has 2 notches is the back. So in addition to the little circles you probably cannot see, let me draw them again, right there. I'm going to put a letter B and circle it back here so I know that is my back. It's very faint, but trust me, it's there. And I'm going to do that for both sides. Okay, so at this point I've got my pocket, my sleeve serged, marked, and everything like that. What I have done is I came back along the bottom edge and I put it in yellow thread on this side so you can see. And basically at about 1/4 inch in, I ran a very long basting stitch, okay? And so that's the point where we're going to be folding it and then folding it up again 1 inch. So the way I'm going to be taking up all of my extra space is just go ahead and give a little pull. I'm not too concerned at this point exactly where all of that extra fullness is going to fall. I just want it to be able to look like it's going to form the right shape. And I know it is black on black, and I see that on the camera right here, so I know it's kind of hard to see, but trust me, if you pull it and just spread out that thickness or that ease, so that when it folds over, it looks like in general it's going to fold over fairly flat. That's what I want, okay? So then I can come back with something to measure with. I'm going to cut my little piece of tape here to be exactly 1 inch because that is what I want here. And I'm just going to start in the middle and folding it so that at my stitching line, I'm going to measure, I'm going to move the camera in so you can see a little bit better here. Okay, so I'm folding it over at that stitching line, put my little piece of ruler there and say, well, that looks close enough, and I'm going to go ahead and put a pin here. So I got my middle position. Actually, doing it this way is better. So I got my middle position done. Now come back over here to the very edge, fold under that edge, place it so it is 1 inch. Flannel, you know, gotta love it. So it's 1 inch from the edge, and put that pin in, okay? So now all of this stuff here is just going to be a matter of starting right in the middle of that space from that stitching line to the edge. That's 1 inch. I haven't turned it under yet. I'm just going to put this pin there to start with, okay? So now I can come back and turn it under. So then I only have a couple inches in between that space and the next pin. All right, so I can just go ahead and pin that. Once I am all done just placing it like this, I'm going to go over to my ironing board and give it one last little tug before I start ironing, just in case there's any puckers. But there really shouldn't be, because I can work it all out right here. And this is going to make it so much smoother and easier than just trying to fit it all in. Because if you can see, that's nice and smooth. Okay, so over here at my ironing board, I hope you can see this. What I would recommend, what works best for me, is doing the outside edge first. And I'm going to try not to steam up my iron too much. You can see I'm just pressing it up and down like this. I'm not going side to side because that might smush some of my fullness here. So once I have my outside edge pressed carefully, then I'm going to come in and just make sure that I have the inside. And if it looks like I need to tug on a, gathering thread a little more, you can do that. That would work out well. So now this is what it looks like. And then this is the wrong side, but my stitching is right up there under the edge. It's never going to be seen anyway because it's on the inside. And if there is any pucker, that's fine, but it's not very much. It's just a whole lot easier for me. Now what the instructions say is they want you to come back and hand baste along this edge so that you can see exactly where the edge is on this side, and then top stitch along that basting thread. For me, I'm just going to edge stitch it looking at this side, just carefully edge stitch it along here, so that, when I'm done, it'll have a row of stitching here. I think that that'll end up the same. But you need to make sure when you're stitching it that all of this extra ease doesn't get knocked out of whack. Okay, I think I've got enough light over here so you can see what I'm doing. So as I'm coming around this curve, you can see there's a whole bunch of little poofy stuff here. That's all the ease that we worked in. So as I sew, I kind of put my little pointy awl or whatever as I sew to hold it in place so that it doesn't all get smushed down to one spot, okay? So let me get going here. And I just move my little awl out like every ½ inch or so just to keep it behaving. Get to the pin, move that. And no, this is not lightning fast, but it does do the trick so that you don't end up with a bunch of bunchiness whenever you get to a pen. So anyhow, that's what it's going to look like on the wrong side, which nobody really cares about. And on the right side, you're going to have a 1 inch row of stitching, which is good. So let me go ahead and finish hemming up both of my sleeves. Alrighty, so back here at my table, let me tell you what I did. I was so excited about showing how to ease in the fullness at the bottom of the sleeve that I skipped way too many steps. I needed to put in my side seam and gathering threads and everything. It'll be okay. I'll show you how I'm going to fix that. But I'm just going to set the sleeves aside for a minute because before we can sew the sleeves on, I need to make the epaulets. All right. So this is what the piece looks like. It does have interfacing on it. And on the pattern, there's a little dot right here. I'm going to mark that on the right side of my fabric because I need to be able to see that when I'm placing it. Okay. So there you go. And then on the fold line, it's so hard to see this sometimes. Come on, get light for me. Along the fold line, it's just in the very center, so I'm not marking that yet. Just folding it straight in half, like this. It's going to be 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I went ahead and drew them on, you know, with my ruler at the 5/8 inch mark. Down here, here, and here. So I need to go ahead and do that for both of them, make that stitching line, and then I'll be right back. Alrighty, so I am just going to use my pinking shears and trim off quite a bit of this seam allowance. Okay, and actually I'm going to take a little more off of these corners. And then carefully flip this right side out. I think I can do it with just my fingers here. Okay, so once it's turned, I'm just going to use my little knitting needle to poke out my corners very carefully, and then I'm just going to press it flat. All right, this one I have already pressed, and you can see that little dot is right in the middle. So that's what's going to be where I match it up to the shoulder seam on my blouse. Okay, so up here, that little piece, here's my front here. I'm going to line up this dot right there with the seam right here, okay? I'm going to go ahead and pin that on. And I just realized that I need to hunt up some more buttons because I pulled out 4 matching green ones for the pockets, but I forgot about the epaulette button. So I might use my other green one up here, you know, since they're close enough that those might be seen by the same glance, and then just use a bigger one for down below because that's a bigger, bolder pocket, you know what I mean? But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and on my machine, just add about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, put a row of stitching right there just to hold it in place. I want to make sure that the point of this epaulette is lined up with the seam up here when I do that, okay, like that, so that everything holds in its right position. Okay, welcome to the next day, and I want to show you where I am. I've got my little epaulettes sewn on. I did not put a buttonhole on here. I'm never going to unbutton this, and I just don't want to deal with buttonhole issues today, actually, so I just sewed it on straight through, and I think that that is fine. Now on the sleeve, remember previously, you're supposed to sew the side seam before you hem it, and I hemmed it first. Let me show you how I'm fixing that. Basically, I just opened up my hem enough, a couple inches worth here, so that I can pin the side seam together, okay? And then I'm going to stitch that at 5/8, which I have already done here, okay? And then I can just fold this back up. I guess I could have just sewn it together already hemmed, but then the problem with doing that is that you end up with a big fat seam allowance right here, and that's just not that pretty. And this really did not take more than a couple minutes to unpick that little bit right there. So I'm going to press that little piece of hem down, re-top stitch that little edge right there, and then what I need to do is come up here at the top of the sleeve. We have these 3 dots. I need to run 2 rows of gathering stitches between the outside dots. Okay, so one just inside my serging, the other one in probably about 3/8 to 1/2 inch seam allowance. And so let me go ahead, get all of that done. Alrighty, so at this point I need to get this sleeve set in here. So I'm just going to open up my bodice so I can see. The pocket is my front, here's my shoulder, here's my back. I'm grabbing a sleeve, obviously this is the right side. I'm putting my sleeve temporarily right side out, okay? I'm going to match up my bottom seam of my sleeve with my side seam here of my blouse. And with just that seam there, I want to make sure that the back, which has the little letter B written on it, is on the back side, okay? Just double checking that I'm putting the right sleeve on the right side. Now, on this pattern in particular, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of difference on the sleeve piece front to back, but it's just the way I do things here. So, now I'm gonna take this top dot here and flip my blouse over. And I'm going to match up this top center dot with obviously the one on my epaulette, but it's also this seam in case you just skip the epaulette, because you know, sometimes we don't need that kind of extraness in our life. I'm just going to pin that on. Then the sides of the sleeve match up pretty smoothly between this dot. There's a notch a few inches from the bottom seam here, and everything. This actually pins together really smoothly, so just go ahead and get that matched up. Put a couple more pins here. Okay, and then up here, we're going to work in some ease. It's not going to have like a lot of gathers, it's more just working in the ease so you have a nice sleeve cap, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and tug on my little bobbin threads here to work. You can see, sorry about that, to work in that ease. And at the point, the 5/8 inch seam line point, it's really pretty smooth there, so we shouldn't have a lot of puckers on the outside. And I just realized all my rings are still in my ring cleaner downstairs, so I will deal with them later. Don't worry, they are not lost. And so I'll pin together the other side the exact same way. You know, it'll just go together nice and smooth between the bottom and the first dot, and then gather this next little bit just by pulling the bobbin threads just slightly, not a whole lot, just slightly. Then to stitch it on, I've already done this side, so I wanted to show you. What I do, because I have a flatbed machine, is I will start my sewing just a little bit above where the side notch is. Here's my bottom seam, okay? I'm going to start here at 5/8 and go all the way around. Then at the point where I started, no, it's dark, sorry about that. If you can see, I kind of veer in about 1/8 of an inch and do a second row of stitching just on this whole bottom curve between the two notches, okay? So I have a reinforcement stitch down here where you're more likely to rip things. Sorry about that. And while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and just put a few clips fairly close to where that reinforcement stitch is, just so it flexes a lot better down here, and it'll make it more comfortable to wear. So when I flip it right side out, okay, that's the bottom, here is the top, and you can see, well, I have one tiny little pucker there, but not really bad, and it might press out actually, I think it will. So it's going to look like a nice smooth sleeve cap up at the top. Okay, so let me get this other side sewn in and I'll be right back. So I've got the top over on my dress form, just kind of hanging out there, trying to pull my camera out so you can see. Oh well. I've got my back, no, this is my skirt front here, piece number 6. My pattern is pinned on upside down. What I need to do is, there are some pocket markings that are going to be here and everything, but before I do that, I'm going to serge around each one of these pieces, you know, just around the edges, and then come back, and up here at the very top edge, they want us to stay stitch it. So before I handle it too much, that's just putting a row of straight stitch across here at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now before I take my pattern piece totally away, I do want to mark one thing. And right here, if I flip this over the right way, you can see some buttonhole markings, hopefully. This is my center front here, okay? So just up here at the very top on the outside of both of these pieces, I'm just going to write a little CF, okay, for center front, just so I know which side is which, because they're going to look very similar by the time I'm done. If I totally lose track of it, as marked on the pattern, there's an arrow here. The side that is on the straight of grain, you know, where the threads are going this way along the same edge, is the center front. The one where cut on a bias is the side. but just wanted to show you, marking it saves me a headache later. Okay, now I have volume. Welcome back. It's actually been a few days since I've done anything on this dress. And I have the front skirt pieces serged around and stay stitching at the top, and I've made some changes up here. I've switched out my sewing machine over there. I'm using Pearl now because I know that her buttonholer is adjusted correctly, so I don't have to deal with anything like that when I go to my next step, because I'm going to be needing to put these buttons that will have a functioning buttonhole, and also there's a buttonhole up here on the waist, you know. So I was doing a lot of switching and moving machines around and things like that, as I do. And I just got to thinking that sometimes I start a project and it seems like a good idea at the time, and then halfway through, it seems like it's always about this stage in the process where I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Am I thrilled with this? I don't think so. And it's like this really weird time where I have to force myself to finish it. And 90-something% of the time, I'm really happy with the result when I'm done. But it's just like getting through this hump. It's like the Wednesday of sewing projects. And I don't know if that hits any of you guys, but it seems like that's an ongoing thing with me, where I hit this point and all of a sudden I'm questioning all of my life choices. But that's where I am right now. But you know what? I'm just going to push through, because it seems like when I get to this point, and honestly, having the channel is a fabulous motivator to keep me going. Because at this point, you know, it's too late in the week to start a new project. I might as well just finish it. It's not going terribly. It's just not super fabulous. You know what I mean? So having the channel keeps me on track, because it's like, no, I'm going to get this done. So just letting you know, state of mind and everything. I just had a nice big cup of coffee, and I'm ready to jump on this again. So what I need to do now is get my skirt back pieces, which look very similar to the skirt front pieces. And I'm going to do the same thing where I serge all the way around them and put stay stitching at the very top so that they don't stretch out of sorts, and then we'll start putting them together. Okay, so I've got them, you know, serged around, and I do have a little CB for center back written on that part of my fabric. But I want to go ahead and get the circles for my pockets punched out, and I'm going to get those marks transferred over right now, just so I can have that out of the way. So on the back piece, there's some dots. On the front piece, there's some dots, because the pocket itself straddles that side seam, kind of like this. You can't see that. Can you see this? Okay, so it's going to straddle this side seam like that. So I'm going to need to get those marked on both my front and back pieces. Okay, so at this point, I need to sew my back seam, my center back seam. I want the side that have my dots, my marks on it, to be on the right side. So I'm going to put that up, and I'm going to put the other side with the markings face down, so my markings will be on the inside, making sure my CB for center backs are matched up here. And I'm just going to sew this center back seam at 5/8 of an inch, and then press this seam allowance open. Alrighty, so here's my center back seam, you know, pressed open and all of that. Here are my pocket marks, and I'm going to go ahead and attach my side seams of my front skirt pieces. Again, putting it so that my dots are on the inside, on the right side. So this side has my little pocket dots on it, so I'm going to put that face down so both sides with marks are together. This dress does not have inseam pockets. It's got those big old ones on the front, so we don't need to worry about that right now. There is a notch on the side to match also, but this should fit really nice and smoothly. Get it matched up, sewing it at 5/8 of an inch, and then pressing my side seam allowances open. Alright, so this is my side seam here, and while I have it nice and flat, I'm just going to go ahead and draw in the stitching lines for my pocket. just so I can keep track of them. Basically connecting the dots down here, top to bottom, here, and on this side. And then that top 2 dots, they get connected. That is where the little overflap is going to get sewn on, up here at the top. Okay, and that's just going to help me keep track of it if I have it drawn out like that. So I'm going to do that on the other side also. Okay, so I'm just putting my skirt aside for a minute because we have a lot of pocket stuff to do here. This is my lower pocket, and it's the same thing where I've got these 2 stitching lines that I'm going to have to match up. So what I'm going to do is just on one side, I don't really feel like I have to do it on both sides. I'm going to put a little mark at the top and bottom of one of these lines. Here we go. Open that up, and with my ruler, just go ahead and draw that in. Come on. Sometimes this pen works well, and sometimes it doesn't. Well, I can see that. I hope you can too. Now, there are other marks on here, but I'm just going to put this aside and use it as a reference to draw everything else in, because this circle is 5/8 inch in, and then the fold line down, which looks to be 1 inch, and it is. So we're just going to reference this and transfer over. But I've drawn that 1 stitching line on here, okay, if you can see it, so that then when I fold this together, wrong sides together, like this, I'll be able to see that line there, and just go ahead and put a row of straight stitching right down there. I'm going to do that for both of my pieces. So just like for the top pockets, after I put that row of stitching in, I'm going to open up this little flap that we made. Make sure it's centered over that seam line and press it flat. Okay? Now, in the instructions, they're saying to go ahead and do a row of stitching at 1/4 inch on the top and bottom just to lock this flap in. Since I'm going to be serging around it, I'm just going to let my serging lock that down, but I'll be really careful to make sure it stays in the position that I want it to as I'm serging. Okay, so here are my front pocket pieces, and keeping an eye on what is the upside, and it looks like for this piece it is up here. So I'm just going to stick a big old pin at the very top so I can remember what is up, okay? And I'm going to set these aside for a minute because I need to get my lower gusset piece here. And I have 2 of these because I do have 2 pockets. And there are some dots out here and here that I need to get marked on both of my pieces. So let me go ahead and get those punched and marked real quick. I'm having a little bit of trouble getting my marks to show up on here. So let me show you what I'm doing. Just coloring in with my white pen, which is not showing up very well. But then while I can see it, putting my ruler on here and lining it up. And then with my pink chalk, I'm just doing a line straight across. And I can see that line pretty well. There's another one there. Okay, and then up here, 1 inch in from the edge is another set of dots. So I know that my dots are 5/8 inch in on each of these lines. That's just going to make it easier for me. Now what I need to do is, after I have these marked, these 2 center dots here on both sides of it, I need to run a row of stitching at 5/8 inch straight through here. So starting like 1 inch before and going to 1 inch after each of these lines, right here and right here, on both of my pockets. On one of my little pocket gusset pieces, I had to piece it, so I chose to piece it where those 2 corners would be. This is the bottom, this is the side, just because that's not going to show up, you know. So just wanted to point that out. After I get this stitched, you know, here, 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 I'm going to go ahead and serge all the way around both of these pieces. So now that I've got my little stitching lines in there, what I need to do is cut up to, but not through, that line of stitching at each one of those points, okay? So it'll be able to open up like this. And I'm actually stopping about 1/16 of an inch or so away from it. I just don't want it to pull through. And I think that that's fine. I'll get enough flex that I need. And the other thing I need to do is make sure that I mark the corresponding points for this on the bottom of my pocket, okay? So down here in these corners on the pattern piece, there's these little dots that are 5/8 of an inch in each way. I went ahead and I just put those on there, and I drew a little bullseye around them so I could find them, because, you know, things disappear in here. So now I'm gonna go ahead and sew this piece on. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just center the bottom down here so that my little slices line up where that dot is. Okay, so let me go ahead and get that pinned down here. Come on, pins. Okay, so now that the bottom is pinned that way, on this side, I'm just going to flip it over so I have like a 90-degree angle down here, a little square, all right? Lining up the cut edge of my pocket with the cut edge of the, of the gusset here. And get that pinned together. And do the same thing on the other side over here. Now I need to stitch it, so what I'm going to do is at 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so starting here, come all the way down, and when I get close to this point, I can just follow that stitching line that I used as a guide. When I get to this point, I'm going to leave the needle down, lift the presser foot, and fold this up out of the way, so I can then come down this way and do the same thing at this corner, so I can work my way all the way around this way on both pockets. Okay, so this is what it looks like now. Okay, I have not ironed it yet, but what I need to do is move my little pin, which was just marking which side is the top here, and clip this thread. Okay, the seam allowances that I just made are going to be going out towards the little side gusset area, and on the wrong side of my fabric, I'm going to go ahead and put in a line at that fold line. Well, I don't know if that's going to show up. Hang on. Switching out to the blue pin here. And this fold line is 1 inch down from the top. Okay. So while I can see this, come on, I need to turn under the very top edge and press that at 1/4 inch, and then come back on the fold line and press that, okay? So it's going to be looking like this, just pressed all the way across on both of the pockets. All right, so now that I have it pressed, what I need to do is, with it folded, start stitching at 5/8 of an inch all the way down, around, and back up this side, okay? So that's going to lock down our little flap here and give us a reinforced stitching line as a guide for when we sew the pocket onto the skirt, I'm thinking. So let me go ahead and get that stitched on. All right, so that is done. You can see that stitching line all the way around here. Okay, so up here where I have it folded, what I'm going to do is come in and trim up so that I only have about 1/4 inch seam allowance up here, and then we're going to be flipping this right side out and doing quite a bit of pressing. Okay, so let me turn this up here at the top. So I have a nice little corner up there. Are they going to have us stitch that closed, I hope? Yes, they are. Okay, good. So it looks like what I'm going to need to do is press this the opposite way now, so it's going to lay in here like this. This is my top right here. Then all the way around along that stitching line that we just did, you need to set that stitching line as the fold line and press that seam allowance under, okay? So you'll just turn and press this edge all the way around like that, okay? And get this all nicely flattened out here. Once I have this pressed down, I'm going to come back and just run a row of edge stitching along this edge here. It'll just show up as a straight line on the outside. I'm really hoping that that is okay. It says stitch facing close to inner edge. Yeah, and they show the stitching line on the outside, so that is correct. So let me go get these pressed and get that stitched across there. Okay, once again, welcome to the next day. I want to go ahead and get these pockets sewn on here. So here's one of my pocket placements, and the way that they want you to do it is just, remember we pressed the edge under here at that stitching line at 5/8 of an inch, is just put that folded edge right alongside of the marked line here. Put a pin down here at this dot, up here, and then edge stitch it first. And then we'll come back and do another little stitch at the very top. But the first thing seems to be just matching up all of these little pieces here. So I'm just going to, you know, edge stitch it fairly close to the edge there. Hopefully it's going to come out nice and neat. I want to make sure that this seam allowance underneath here stays open. So I'm going to stick a pin on each side of that little seam right there. Okay. And then up here, oops. Did I overshoot that? I think I did. Okay. I need to, you know what? It looks like I have a little bit extra down here. So what I'm going to do is just pin it at the very top so that my very tops line up where those dots are. And if it comes slightly longer down here at the bottom, then it does, but I don't think that it's going to be as obvious as if I have my tops misaligned, you know? So let me pull these out. Pull this down. I think that's fine. It's going to put my bottom line maybe a 1/4 inch lower than the line that I have marked, but I really don't think that that's going to make a difference here. Okay, so with that, pretend this is pinned. I'm going to edge stitch it all the way around just like this on both sides. Okay, so I got this pocket on completely, and I wanted to show you, once you go all the way around, you're going to need to come back and stitch up here again to hold the front part on. What that means, I'll bring you closer to see this side. I have this, just the outside edge put on, and if I had to do this again, I would trim the seam allowance in here that's up inside of this area. I would trim that back a whole lot, because what you need to do is fold it so that it's like this. Let me move you down here. So it's like this, and then match up this edge with the edge of the first part that was stitched down here. I'm just overlapping that. Now the seam allowance that I'm talking about, it's in here and it's folded, so it feels really, really thick. I think if I had trimmed it, you know, this part, this seam allowance again in here, to like a 1/4 inch, it would be a lot easier. But you know, c'est la vie. So I'm going to fold this down here, and then the directions say to stitch up here at the top a 1/4 inch. I actually am stitching it almost all the way down to this stitching line. I think that's going to hold it a little more securely for me, especially because of all this thickness right there. And I'm going to have this other big flap on top of it. Okay, so let me just stick a pin there really quick. And then once you have this stitching in, it's a whole lot easier to press the side, because this is going to want to fold like that. So then what I did is I just folded it so that these two sides here matched up, and then I pressed it. Now, the other thing is at the very bottom, there's more gussety stuff here. So according to the instructions, they want you to press it so that it's folded up like that, so that it's going to want to come out. I tried that, and I think I liked it better just pressing it straight down so it's sitting a lot flatter. It would take me 2 minutes to fold that up and press it to the inside. Let me lift it up and show you what I mean. Like this, okay? I think that that's just a judgment call. For me personally, I don't mind having it laying down so it's hanging a little bit flatter on me, okay? It'll still open up if you put something in there, so that's not a big deal. So let me go ahead and make this little top stitch area right up here on both sides of this pocket, and then we're going to get started working on the flap, which is piece number 10, and they are interfaced. Right, so I've got my pieces here. You're going to need to fold it in half like this and sew it, and I'm showing you on the pattern because I've got interfacing peeking out. It might be harder to tell, but just like the top flap, when you get up towards the edges, the cut edges up here, you're going to need to veer in just about 1/8 of an inch, just kind of following this curve up here on both sides. Okay, so now that that is done, I am pinking these seam allowances so that they are smaller and will lay flatter, hopefully. I need to flip this right side out and press it, and I will be putting a functional buttonhole in the middle. There's a mark right here, but let me get these pressed first before I mark that buttonhole. Okay, if you remember, I used up all my green buttons on the top, so I've grabbed some pink ones, and they are, you know, about 5/8 of an inch, so they're going to work for the size-wise, I think color-wise, you know, very colorful pockets, why not? So I need to get my button placement marked on my little flaps. I'm going to want it just in the middle, so I just folded these in half. I don't know if you can see, there's a little crease here where I folded it in half. So that's going to mark the placement, you know, this way. And I'm going to go ahead and draw that line in here. Hopefully that will show up. Oh, these pens. Sometimes they work well and sometimes they just don't. And then I'm going to want it up probably at least 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to get my ruler down here at the folded edge and put it at 1/4 inch, draw my line. This is going to be my starting point right here. Get a chalk. That might show up for you better. I can see it, but I know the camera can't. Okay, so if I start it at this point, there's a little T, and I go up that track for 5/8 of an inch, that should mark my buttonholes really well. So, like I said, I've got Pearl over there, I've got her buttonholer, I'm gonna set up on her, mark this one the same, run those buttonholes, and I will be back shortly. Alrighty, so time to put my little flaps on, and I need to, when I'm using these white pens, I need to be more patient because basically they look like they're not doing anything when you first write, but as soon as they dry, they brighten up. And as soon as I turned off the camera and went over there, I had big white lines going, so you know. I'll just need to be more patient. But what I need to do now is sew my little flaps on. So the dot on these flaps are 5/8 of an inch up. At least that is what it appears to be right there. And that dot is indicating the point where this flap is going to be joining with this dot on here. But I'm going to do it because 5/8 of an inch on this side, I don't know if I just marked it a little skewed or something, but this is not 5/8 of an inch from there. And I don't want this flap part here to overlap my pocket. So I am just going to line up the cut edge of my pocket just above here. Okay, so the cut edge of my pocket flap, I should say, and I did serge it. And pin it there, and then I'm going to draw a mark on this flap at 5/8 of an inch up so that I have a uniform size flap when I'm done. So if I put my little ruler right here, and again I'm going to use my white pen, which will not show up very much right now, but as soon as it's dry it will, okay? And then I can sew across there when I get to my sewing machine. So, oh, I have not cut my little buttonholes open. I'm going to do that really quickly because it'll be a lot easier before. And I'll do this that way after I turn off the camera, but that's a little awkward on camera. I'm using my buttonhole cutting scissors that have a tiny bit of rust on them, but that won't hurt my feelings. I'm just coming in there. Let's make sure it fits the button, and it does nicely, so yay, that's good. Okay. Okay, so once I got it sewed on, I pressed the flap down, and now I'm just gonna get my, thread, and I need to sew my button on. So if I take my little pen and about midway in my buttonhole, I'm just gonna wiggle it around. That's gonna give me the mark right here on this side that I need to sew my button through right there. So I'm just gonna do that, off camera, and I'll be back shortly. Okay, I just set my little skirt piece aside, and I have piece number 12 here, and I'm gonna need to get some things marked. I have notches. This is a collar piece, and they are using 5/8 inch seam allowances, but I'm gonna see if we can go with that at this point. If I need to trim it later, I guess I can. But I'm clipping these. There are some dots right here that I really need to transfer over. So give me a moment to, come on, get that done, and then I will be right back. So I've got those 3 little dots marked, and I've drawn little bullseyes around them so I can see them. I'm marking them on the wrong side. And I need to match up and sew this center seam. This is at 5/8 of an inch right here, and then I'm gonna press that seam allowance open. All right, so I got my bodice back over here because we're gonna be attaching this thing. And if you remember, we did this stay stitching here. I need to clip open, got these handy, I'll just use them. I need to clip open this corner up to that stitching, but not through it. Okay, so it'll open all the way like that. I need to do that on both sides here. I know you probably can't see my stitching, but trust me, there's a little dot there and it goes up to it, okay? So I do have these dots drawn on my wrong side of my bodice here, and those are going to match up with the dots that we just did over here, okay? So I'm going to start with my center back and match up that seam allowance, and I'm going to pin again both sides of the seam just to make sure seam allowances lay nice and flat. Then excuse me, so sorry about that. The next dot right here, that's going to match up, trying to see where I am here. Oh my goodness. Hold on just one moment. I forgot to mark one of my dots down here. This is the one I was looking for. So this is the shoulder one. I don't know why I skipped that. So I'm just gonna quickly put it back on here, right there. Okay, and I want this one because, we're dealing with pieces of fabric that can stretch, and I want to make sure that this lines up where it's supposed to, which is at the shoulder seam. So I'm just going to stick a pin through that dot and stick a pin through my shoulder seam at that seam line, that's where it should line up then. My cat just wandered in. Hi, Midna. Okay, so now it looks like there's a little bit of ease there. I can just make it work. The stay stitching might be a little bit snug here. That's okay. You're okay, honey. She likes to tell us about her day. Okay, so now there's this dot here where it's a corner. That dot is the one, stay down, honey. That dot is the one that's going to match up to this part that we spliced open. Okay, so I'm just going to set that here for a moment. The point of this in between those two spliced ones, just to hold it still while I work other parts here. So now I have a notch that's kind of matching up. It's actually off by about 1/8 of an inch, but that's okay. That is close enough for me if I can get all of this to work here. You're fine. Oh my goodness. Okay. And then this is not going to come all the way to the end, but there's a dot up here and a dot here. I'm dealing with this dot, all right, that one. So if I stick a pin through this dot on my bodice, whoop, that needs to go through this dot here that is at this second corner of my, I know, honey, of my piece. Sorry, she's got claws in me. All right, so now that I can see that that is lined up, I'm going to bring it back on this side and just pin it in, okay? So we got all kinds of funky angles going on. I'm probably going to overpin it by putting extra ones on just to keep it where it needs to be. All right, so that is everything from center back to this side. I need to do the exact same thing over here, matching up the shoulder seam, the little dots, you know, this corner here to that notch, this corner to the inner dot, all of that, and then I'll be right back. Right, so I'm all pinned. Now when I go to sew this, I need to start my stitching at this circle, not out here, leaving this seam allowance open right here. Starting stitching at this circle, coming down, over, and then up and ending at this circle. Don't going beyond that, leave this open, okay? Now on mine in particular, you know, there's a couple little areas where it looks like the ease is slightly off. I'm going to chalk that up to different curvatures and things like that. And I personally don't see a problem with, you know, as I'm stitching it, give a slight little tug, and I think all of those little sections are just going to work themselves out. Okay, but be very careful coming around this corner. Make sure you have a really nice corner there. So what I would do is, like sewing, get to that point, leave your needle down, lift your presser foot up, flip everything, and make sure that underneath nothing is caught, and then do that little bit right there. It's going to be a lot easier if you can sew it while looking at the bodice side with your collar piece underneath, because this corner is going to want to get all out of sorts, and that way you can keep an eye on it. So let me see here. The reason I know is because I did it that way the first time and my corner was totally wrong placement. So do yourself a favor and watch the bodice side first, okay? So anyway, that way I can just watch exactly where that is. Actually, I'm going to hold it in place with this pen and come straight up to that dot. All right, I'm in the dot now. Then I can lift up my presser foot. Try to get some better light here, okay? And rotate everything and then put it back down. And then that way I can make sure that my bodice fabric is lining up where it needs to, because that's a tricky, tricky corner right there. I'm just going to take it all the way to that dot, back it up, and go ahead and pull it out. Okay, so there's my line of stitching, and so I can turn it and I get a corner that looks like this. Okay, that's what I want. That is thread from the first time. Now this is what it looks like when you look at the other side and you get totally out of whack. It looks great there, but oh my gosh, I totally missed the corner. So again, do yourself a favor. I'm just going to pick this part out and redo it. Watch this side. It'll make your life a lot happier. Okay, so looking at it right now, this is what I'm looking at, okay? Making sure that this is not closed in all the way, that that's nice and open, and everything. I have not pressed it yet. I need to actually set this little piece aside and deal with my facing now, because we're going to put the other side of the collar onto the big long facing piece. And both of these are interfaced, the collar and the facing. Well, I need to punch out circles, clip notches, transfer over markings onto, I believe it is my wrong side. Yes, it is to my wrong side of my collar. So let me get this done first and I'll be right back. Okay. Okay, so I've got my collar pieces marked. You know, I can see those dots on the wrong side pretty well. I've got my facing pieces marked. There are 3 dots up here. There's some down here. It says only mark it on the right side. At this point, my brain can't comprehend which one is the right side, so I just marked it onto both. If you think you're gonna lose track of them, just circle them, you know. But before I get started attaching my collar to my facing piece, excuse me, I need to do some stay stitching. So up here on my collar piece, I need to stitch, and I'm going to do it at 5/8 of an inch. And again, they're going to say just do 1 inch on each side of this thing, but in the picture they're showing stay stitch the entire piece. So I'm just going to stay stitch the entire piece at 5/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw my line so I know exactly where to make that curve, you know. If you feel more confident and don't need the line, then skip it. But I'm going to do that, put a line of stitching right along there. And then once that stitching is in, then you can come in here and slice this corner up to that point where your stitching is going to be. Okay, so with that done, I just set my little pieces aside, but I have already made that clip right there. I need to get my piece number 11 upper collars sewn together. So along this edge, stitch it at 5/8 of an inch and then press that seam allowance open. Right now, what I need to do is there is a little dot here and here. And I need to stitch reinforcement stitching. I'm going to do it from probably about 1/2 inch on this side of this little dot at 5/8 of an inch all the way across to about 1/2 inch beyond this dot. Okay, so now I'm going to clip up to that stitching line, and I made sure when I was stitching it, I was doing it at 5/8 of an inch, so, you know, there you go. Ooh, the pattern said only do it at 1/2 inch. Well, I only clipped to 1/2 inch. Hopefully my stitching line won't show, you know. But they say do it at 1/2 inch seam allowance. That's my bad, but the world will keep turning, so I'm not going to worry about it. But what I need to do is turn this up, and when I turn it up, I'm going to turn it so that I don't see any stitching. That's going to give me that extra 1/8 of an inch there, so, and that I'm only turning it up 1/2 inch. Okay, so if I go over to my ironing board and press this carefully so I get a nice crease, then I'm going to come back with my pinking shears and take off probably about 1/2 of this folded up area just to take some of the bulk out. Okay, oopsie, there we go. So now that is done. Now on the instruction sheet, they are showing a line of basting stitches out here on this outside edge. I'm not really seeing that down here, and I'm not really seeing what it's for. I don't really need it to stay stitch it because I am interfaced, so the interfacing is going to keep it from stretching. And I'm not really basting anything together, so I'm actually going to skip this little line. I don't see what the point of that. All right, so now I need to go ahead and get this sewn onto my facing pieces. Okay, so let me just leave this here for a second. The facing pieces, up here at the very top, there's a point where it starts to angle in, and that should be at 5/8 of an inch. That's an important point, but they don't really have a dot there, so I'm just drawing a little line. Actually, it might be more helpful if I do it on the wrong side here, so I'll just do it all the way across. This is the line that should match up with this point here, which also should match up with the shoulder seam. So let me get that at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so now I have that there. Now again, we're not going to sew into this area. We're going to be stopping at that point. So to figure out which one goes where, what I would say is put your collar piece upside down, put your facing piece upside down, and see where this position is, okay? That's how they're going to need to go together. So then you can just pick it up and fold them together, and you know that you're doing it right. Let me go ahead and move this little spot here up first. This dot that we clipped to, excuse me, I don't know what's wrong with my throat this morning. That dot should match up with this corner dot here. Okay, so you can see I have my pin going through there. Just going to hold that in place. And just like the other one, when you're sewing it, it's going to be easier for you if you can watch this side. All right, so I'm just going to carefully open that up so that these cut edges are matching the same cut edges down below. Get this anchored in place here. Pin this over here. They are fiddly. This is a fiddly part, not gonna lie. Okay, so now the point that I just drew here that is 5/8 of an inch down, if I fold that in, that should line up with this part here on the collar that we clipped, okay? And actually, I'm gonna leave it folded. Do they have you sew it folded? No, they don't. Well, that's okay. Fold it just so you can make sure everything is gonna line up, and then open it up. But when you stitch, you only stitch up to that crosshatch point, okay? So let me put a pin here. And there is a notch in the middle, which should match up, okay? All right, so then on this side, so fiddly, so fiddly, there's another dot right here, okay? I'm gonna stick my pin through this dot, and it's gonna also go through this dot right, come on, here, okay? So I can make sure that this, you know, big pin here, if I get my fabric nice and straightened out, that this is running along the same edge. There's a notch there that should match up, and I can anchor this in place like that. Okay, is that as far as I go? I believe it is. I believe it is. Okay, so then this you leave open. So when you're stitching it, again, I'm going to stitch it on this side so I can see this opening and make sure I don't go off track. Stitching it from this side, start here at that point 5/8 of an inch in, okay, or wherever it is so it matches up right here. Then take that down to this point and down to, you know what, that dot is blending in. This point right here, that's where I need to stop. I don't want to go any farther than that point right there, okay? So when I'm done, all of this has not been stitched together, okay? So let me do that. Let me stitch that on this side, do the exact same thing, but you know, opposite direction on the other side of my collar too. Okay, so that stitching is done here, and I need to press it. So I'm just going to be pressing this so everything is going to lay nice and flat. Let me flip it over this way. It may make more sense this way. Okay, let me make sure that's what they're doing on here. It looks like it. This bottom part here, this is the part we're focused on. Okay, so pressing this so it comes straight down, and this part out here so it goes straight out that way. This does feel pretty thick right here, so I'm going to go ahead and pink this also. It doesn't really say to in the instructions, but this just feels fairly thick to me, and I want to get that out. Now, I'm not going to be trimming up here beyond where I stitched, but just this area where I have already stitched. I'm going to pink it here, okay? I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Get this nice and flat. I need to press also this area on this part. It's the same thing where I'm pushing this down, okay? And this is going to lay nice and flat. This is going to be folded. I don't know if you can see. That's folded right there, okay? And this is not interfaced, and it's not nearly as thick as all of this over here, so I'm not going to worry about pinking this one. Okay, so I need to get my skirt sewn onto my bodice. I kind of skipped that step earlier because I didn't want to have to deal with this when there was a big skirt attached. But now is the time. So I'm just going to lay my bodice upside down here on my table so I can see my center back and side seams really clearly and go get my skirt. And I am matching up and pinning the same center back to center back, side seams to side seams, front edge to front edge. And then I will do everything, you know, in between. But it should, you know, fit together really well without having to be gathered or eased in, hopefully. So let me go ahead and get it pinned. And then this is going to be stitched at 5/8 of an inch all the way across. And then when you're done, you're going to press the entire seam allowance up towards the bodice. Okay, not pressing it open, but pressing it up towards the bodice. So I just wanted to show you kind of where we are right now. The facing that has the outer collar is not on here yet. I can tell you once I do put that on, I am going to let this sit on my dress form overnight before I hem it, just because of the nature of it's like a circular curved hem. And with this fabric being slightly unstable, there's a real good chance that it's going to settle. So before I hem it, I want to be able to even it up. But, you know, it's looking pretty comfortable right now. Understanding that there is going to be a tie that comes around here, you know. I am glad I did pockets that are just up against flat and not a bag like this. And honestly, the amount of bag on here is a lot less than I thought it would be based on the photo on the pattern envelope. It just looked a lot wider on the envelope, so it might not have been that bad, but to me, I think that that's, you know, safer for me. So, on the facing, there's a couple spots for a button here, or actually I think 2 here, and 1 below, or is it 1 here and 2 below? I can't remember, but there is 3 buttons, so I need to come up with more buttons. But I think it's cute. It's going to be comfortable, you know. This flannel is very comfortable, so I just wanted you to see what it looks like right now before we put the facing on. All right, so I just realized looking at my camera that the front looked totally skewed on my dress form. I had it pinned wrong. I had one side pinned like 1.5 inches lower than the other. It'll even up when I actually get it put together correctly here. What I need to do now is match up my facing to, let me raise you up a bit here, my facing to my garment. And so I'm just going to start out here matching up this center collar back, and I'm only, let's see here, let me just worry about the collar first. Let's just get the collar done first. Need to make sure that we're coming to the same point over on this side. So once I have it pinned, I'm only sewing the collar from this dot here. Okay, if you can see, there's a tiny dot there. From that dot up, over, and back down on this side to this dot here. I want to make sure none of this stuff is getting caught in the process. Okay, so let's just get that part stitched first. Okay, I have got it mostly pinned here, and I wanted to show you something. When you're going to be stitching it, it's important that on the inside here, your 2 layers, that everything matches up perfectly at this point, okay? So if you need to adjust one of these a little higher or lower than the other, so that at this intersection right here, everything comes together, go ahead and do it right now, all right? Now, my dot that I have drawn on the outside is actually slightly off. What I'm going to be sewing to is this point where this stitching line ends, all right? So up here at this corner, I'm going to be leaving my needle in, pivoting, and I want to come down and stop right there. Don't go past it, okay? So even if the little dot that you drew is like here or something, forget that for right now and aim where this line of stitching ends, but making sure none of this is getting caught in that stitching, okay? Okay, so I've got that stitched. So before we go any further, you might want to open things up and make sure that at this point it looks like everything is coming together correctly. I'll put this one up here. Is everything coming together? Well, look at that. This side, I actually have it about 1/8 of an inch higher over here. Oh my goodness. You know what? I'm going to fix that. I'm going to fix that just because it's going to cause issues if I don't. It's more evident on this side. I did not match those two up properly. So I'm going to pick out this row of stitching, reposition these two, do that row of stitching, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I am just going to open up the stitches up to this point where I turned, okay? And to make my life easier, I'm going to stick a pin in at this point right here and have it come out at the point over here where it needs to, so that I can make sure those 2 points are lined up correctly. And I have a little bit of a bump, so I'm going to need to actually pull out stitching probably to about there so I can push this in. See, it wants to do that kind of thing. So that's okay. That's all right. That's not that big of a deal. Just putting a little pin in here just to make sure everything is still good. And I'm going to double pin. I'm going to anchor this one in there also. So let me pull out stitching about that far, restitch this, double check again that it's good, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so now at this point, things are coming together. That's what I want. Now up here where I had to adjust it, it's a little off, but honestly, that doesn't matter nearly as much as this does, because I'm going to be trimming this anyway, you know. But what we need to do now is repin everything to go down the front of the facing piece here. And I know I haven't finished off this edge yet. I'm going to do that in a bit. So what I need to do is push the collar seam allowances up, push these facing seam allowances up, okay? And I'm going to pin the outside edge here first, right? But up at this point, everything we just did ended in here, all right? These seam allowances on the collar go up, the facing goes up, so it looks like this now, okay? I need to put a pin right there. You can kind of see my little dot. That's where I need to start my stitching. But just to make sure that that dot placement hasn't gotten totally screwed up, I'm going to stick my pin through it and open this up to see where that's hitting. And you can see on this side it's hitting on the right spot, so that's good. It's hard to see it on the black fabric, I know, okay? So get this pin together here, and I'm going to sew from this dot up here. There's another dot in the corner, but only to 5/8 of an inch here. And then the entire front, I need to pin all of this, of course, but this whole front facing area, raise you up. That's going to get pinned to this. Make sure your seam allowance at your waistline is still going up, you know. And this whole front is going to get sewed at 5/8 of an inch. But this is the key part to keep an eye on right here. So when you stitch it, you're only going through these two pieces of fabric. Your needle should not go through any of this or any of the seam allowance for it, okay? So from here, up, and then all the way down, 5/8 of an inch. Got that done, and I wanted to show you while I was over at my table, I went ahead and serged the unfinished long edge of this facing piece, just up the side, the top. I need to trim that, but I didn't do that because that's going to get folded in, okay? So I have not trimmed any of my seam allowances yet because I want to pop it right side out just quickly to make sure there's nothing drastically wrong. I'm not going to worry about getting my corners, you know, perfect and everything at this point. I just want to be able to pop it open to see, is this going to lay flat here in this corner? okay? And that looks fine. That looks good on that side. So I'm gonna get that put back together and then come over to the other side and just open it up and carefully pop these corners out just a little bit and see if I'm laying it flat. How will that look? I think it's going to be fine, you know? So I'm going to call that good right now. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of trimming here. I think it's easier to see on this side. Up here at the collar, I'm using my pinking shears. I'm just kind of taking bulk out. And again, I'm using a pretty lightweight cotton fabric here with a lightweight interfacing. If you're using a thicker fabric, you're definitely either going to want to pink it or grade this, which means, you know, trimming each layer at a slightly different length so that there's not a whole lot of bulk in one spot. Okay, and then I'm going to come down this little bit and also take about half, take about half of this seam allowance out here. Okay, let me go ahead and do that, and I'm going to do the same thing here. And I'm not going to worry too much about down the front. I'm probably going to understitch the front. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not going to understitch the front. I'm trying to see if they have you top stitch or edge stitch around, and I don't think they do. It looks like they're just going to have you press it nicely. So that's what we're going to do after I trim this seam allowance. And again, if you have a thicker fabric, definitely pink the entire way. I'm not going to worry about that right now. And we're going to go over to the ironing board and press it well. And while I'm poking this out, I thought I would mention, if you get to this point and when you're, you know, getting everything nice and neat and you go into tug this, and I'll just tug it extra, and there's a hole here, or there's something where those aren't matching up exactly. If it was me, you know, everyone can do it their own way, you do you, but I would just get a little matching thread and a needle and come in from the inside here and just take a couple strategic little stitches to cinch it up and not go back to the sewing machine at that point, because it's really just usually a tiny little spot. And, you know, trying to get that tiny spot under your needle and have the feed dogs move exactly the right way, it's usually a lot more trouble than it's worth. Okay? Okay, so I'm over here getting my collar and facing pressed, and I've got this side done. And what I wanted to tell you is when you're pressing it, because it's not understitched, it's not top stitched, it just is what it is. When you're looking at it this way, this is going to be the visible part up here, okay, up to the point of right about where your waist is. So if possible, kind of roll it, especially if you're using two different fabrics like I am, kind of roll it so that you don't see the back fabric at this point, okay, and press that. And the same with the collar, especially if you're using two different fabrics. I am not, thankfully. Try to roll this so that you see all of this and no stitching. And if there is any stitching showing, or you see any edge, like see on this side, you can kind of see the green here, that's from the front fabric, but it's on the back, which is going to be the under collar, okay? So you want to be sure and press it right so that that is as neat as possible. But when you get down below the waist, it's the garment, what's going to be visible is this side. So you kind of have to flip it upside down here, and I have not pressed this side yet. And, you know, like me, especially if you have two different fabrics, push it all the way over when you're pressing it. And I press this flat first before I do the edge. So before I even did this, I came in here and I just pressed it flat. You know, if you want to press it open, fine. I just pressed everything over to one side first. But on below the waist, you want to make it so that if there is any fabric from the other side showing, it's here. Okay, so you can kind of see a little bit of black there. That's how I want to press this. So, you know, it's just a little thing. You don't have to do that, but to me, that's going to make it a little bit neater. So let me just finish pressing my dress. So while I was ironing, I went ahead and pinned where my facing is going to meet up with my seam allowance of, this is where my bodice is sewn onto my skirt, because I'm going to go ahead and just whip stitch this down to it right there, so it's going to want to stay nice and neat. I will do that in a moment because I'm going to have my needle and thread out, because I need to deal with all of this going on up here in the collar. Okay, so let me see if I can do this so you can see. First of all, the seam allowance here going into the neckline is fairly thick, so especially in this center area where I have a couple seam allowances going there, I'm just going to pink that out. If you need to do more, but you want this to be pushed up into the collar area. And then, you know, it's already been pressed up here, so that is nice. Let me move you up a hair. So I'm just going to bring this down and place it over the stitching line here, and for some reason I pre-press this under. I don't like to do that. I'm actually going to have to roll this under a little bit more because I want the folded edge of this piece of my collar to match up just barely beyond my stitching line here, and I'm lining up my center back piece, the center back seam here. Okay, so I'm just going to stick a pin there to hold it, and since I had to push it in a little bit more underneath, I'm going to do that here also. What I need to do is this top part of the facing, I'm folding that under, and it needs to line up with the seam where the stitching line is for my shoulder seam here. So this edge here, it's folded under 5/8 of an inch, and it's lined up right along this stitching line, okay? So I am placing this intersection, this corner here, so it's fitting right over this fold over this stitching line, and this fold over this stitching line, okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and get that pinned on in a couple places to hold it securely, and right up here. Okay, so now that is pinned, this is pinned, we've got all this stuff in the middle, and so I'm just going to average it together. That looks pretty good to me. I'm going to stick another pin here. Now I'm going to do the same type of thing over on this side with this. So let me trim that off there. With this facing, flipping it under, lining up this point here with this point right here, okay? I find that doing that intersection first and then all of the gappy stuff in between after makes my life a lot easier. Okay, but anyway, once I get all of this done, I'm going to come back with a needle and thread, you know, something inconspicuous, probably black, and just carefully and as invisibly as possible whip stitch all of this down, and then I'm going to come back down here and stitch the edge of my facing to the little seam allowance right here to hold that together. Alrighty, so at this point we have 3 buttons that we need to put on that are going to be hidden. They're going to be on the inside. And then there is 1 button that has a buttonhole on the visible side that's going to show. So, you know, since I'm playing patchwork buttons here, I'm going to use these 3 little flat red ones for my 3 hidden ones, and then my last remaining pink one for the one that's going to show, because that'll kind of match up with the pink one on the bottom pockets. Maybe, you know, no one will probably even notice, but that's what we're going to do. So what I'm going to do is on the pattern piece, and this is the skirt piece, if you can see there is a buttonhole here, and if I measure from the end of that buttonhole to the cut edge is 1 1/8 inches. So since we have a 5/8 inch seam allowance, that means that my buttonhole is going to start 1/2 inch from the fold, okay? And also, sorry about that, I did not mark these on my fabric ahead of time. I'm just going to measure. So when I'm looking, let me raise you up here. So when I look at the top on the picture, the first buttonhole is going to be right below that seam where the bodice joins the skirt, okay? So if I can just, you know, eyeball that and put that there, I can see that there is little over 6.5 inches between that button and this one. So I'm gonna bring my dress over and we're just gonna mark where these are gonna fit. All right, so I've got my dress just opened up. This is the inside here, obviously. And I need to flip it so that I'm looking at the right side here. This is the side of my dress that's gonna be getting the buttonhole. And I feel a whole lot of bulk going on right there, so I did whip stitch that part, but actually I'm gonna pull this open here and just trim out a little bit of this seam allowance here, just so that buttonhole is gonna lay flatter. Let's see if that's any better. Oh, that's a lot better. Okay, so my first buttonhole is, if I use my little ruler here, and my white pen, which will eventually show up, I'm going to draw my starting gauge at 1/2 inch in. And remember I said that it was 6.5 inches below the first one. So if I say this is my first one, right about here is going to be my second one. And I'm just going to draw this track of my buttonhole. These buttonholes, are they going side to side? Yes, they are. They're going to start here and come out this way. So I just need a starting point and a track. And I have my track there, so I'm going to put a little X here for my starting point. Okay, now there is also one more button that's going to be up here. All right, so right here is my buttonhole marking, and I can tell if I put my ruler here, it's the same distance from the edge. Okay, and if I put my ruler here, that is 1, 2, it's almost exactly 3 inches, okay? So if I take out my seam allowance, we're gonna say 2.5 inches from that seam line up is where I need to put my buttonhole. Okay, so if I put my ruler here on the seam line at 2.5 inches, that's where the track needs to be. And putting my ruler so I can draw a line 1/2 inch out, that's where the starting point's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead, back over to my buttonholer on purl and put 3 buttonholes in. I need to do it so I make sure I have the right size for these buttons. I did not measure them, they look 5/8, but let me take a quick peek. I put this on here, yeah, it is a 5/8 inch button, so we're good. And they don't actually have the button placement marked on the instructions, but from the picture, it looks like it's in the same level, but over closer to the edge, probably 1/2 inch from the edge on the other side of the facing. So let me just get this laid out so it makes sense. Again, this is going to be on the underneath, okay? So if I put this underneath here, see if I can raise you up so this makes a little more sense here. So this side is on the underneath. If this side is going over it like this, I need to put my buttons along this edge here, okay? So I can see that this buttonhole, and sometimes when you sew a buttonhole on, it gets shifted 1/16 of an inch one way or another. So that's why measuring again, I can see that from my sewn seam right here, my buttonhole center is about 3/8 of an inch below that instead of 1/2 inch. You know, that's not going to kill me. So over here, I can feel with my fingers underneath that the edge of my facing is right there, okay? And I can see, and I'm doing it this side. Well, you know what? Let me flip it over. Okay, so now that I measured that, I am going to measure 3/8 of an inch down from this seam line right here and draw a line at that point. I know it doesn't look like it's going to show up, it will. And then just like the other side, I'm going to sew my button on 1/2 inch in. Okay, now there is interfacing here. And if you feel like that's not quite enough, you can stick another extra piece of interfacing behind when you stitch it on. I'm not stitching all the way through to this side. I'm just going to sew my button on right here, you know, with my hand underneath here, so that I just keep everything, like all my stitching right here, if that makes sense. All right, and then once I have this one on, I will go ahead and measure and mark for the lower button, for my upper button, and get all 3 of my red buttons sewn on so that they match up with my other buttonholes. This will be about here, this will be about here, and cut my other buttonholes open and button it together so we can see what it looks like at this point. Okay, so at this point I have my buttons buttoned over here, okay? So it's being held together fairly low. I would say at least at low hip level is where this button is down here, okay? So just laying it over, making sure that this seam line is lined up with the one underneath it here. I need to mark for my other buttonhole, which is going to be the one visible. And on the pattern, you can see that they want it right here underneath this seam line, which is good because all the seam allowance is right up here on top. So trying to put a buttonhole through that would be tough. So I am just going to, again, draw my little line at 1/2 inch in, right here, and at 1/2 inch below, actually 3/8 of an inch below the stitching line, right here. So now I have my little mark. I'm going to go ahead, make this one little buttonhole, and then once I have that buttonhole made and cut, then I will sew the button right here. So that's what it's going to look like, you know, one little pink button, but there is going to be a black tie that goes over it, so it might not even show. I've got my little buttonhole here in the front, and I'm going to place my button on this side. So here's my buttonhole opening. I'm going to put my button in, put my little mark way over on the side of my buttonhole closest to the opening here, because if it's going to want to pull, I want it to already be traveled over the maximum amount there. So I've got my little dots here. I want to make sure that my position down is the same, and I think I actually misadjusted that. Yeah, my buttonhole is 1/2 inch lower than my seam line instead of 3/8. You know, those things happen. So I'll put a little mark across right there so I know exactly where to sew my button on over here so that it's going to line up. And I'm still going through, on this one, I'm going through this fabric and the facing fabric on the back here. So it's going to have more of a bite to it with the thread and everything. So since my buttonhole is going this way and I'm doing a 2-hole button, I want to make sure that those 2 holes are also horizontal, you know. If my buttonhole was going vertical, I'd turn and put my button on vertically, but this way she's going to be locked in, whoopsie, horizontally, just like this. Okay, I want to show you something. I've got, hang on, let me turn this other light on, there. I got the dress, you know, a lot of the ways done. I still need to do the hem. I still need to do the little sash that goes along here. And, you know, understanding that it's just a dress form, it's not a real body, but the button underneath here, it's right about here, and it's only in the facing. It's not going all the way through to the outside fabric. And I think that that might be a problem because, you know, when there's a little bit of strain, it's kind of pulling the facing out. So it's like curling out here. You know, it's a pretty facing. It's underneath there. I don't know if that's a problem or not. What I could do is a couple things. One, I could restitch that button so that it comes all the way through the fabric, but I don't really want to do that because that might not look so pretty. I could put another button on the outside right here, you know, about 2 inches up, the same height as this one, but on the outside, so that it's, you know, a uniform amount of tug going through all layers there. You know, there's a few things I could do, and I'm not too sure at this point if it's a problem. I think what I'm going to do is do the sash to go around here first, tie the sash on, see how it looks, and then if this is really bothering me, go back and probably put another button like right here. You know what I mean? Just to hold it more securely. But I think having the facing in a pop of color is actually kind of pretty. Now I also have it on here because the skirt, it is kind of a circular cut skirt, and so I do need to work on the hem. I have it on here because I wanted to see if it was settling. Sometimes skirts that are cut circular or on a bias kind of settle, and it still looks really uniform for me. So I'm just going to go ahead, make about 1¼ inch hem. I'll show you how I'm going to do that on there, just as is without leveling anything out, because I think it's fine. So yeah, that's what she looks like right now. I'm going to go ahead, flip the camera back. We're going to make the sash, put the sash on, see how she looks, and then do the hem. Okay, so grabbing my sash piece here, there are 2 of them cut, and I need to sew them together at this end. You know, the end that is straight, that's the side we are piecing together. I'm going to sew this at 5/8 of an inch and then press that seam allowance open. Take the rest of this out and I will be right back. Okay, so there is my pressed open seam, and I'm folding it right sides together. And I'm going to stitch it, you know, at 5/8 of an inch down here, pivot, come all the way. And when I get to, you know, about 3 or 4 inches away from this seam line, stop. And then do the same thing over here and stop. So I have an opening, you know, 6 to 8 inches wide right here. So I have plenty of room to flip these right side out. All right, so now that the stitching is done, I'm just going to cut these corners, cut some of the bulk out of this tip here. I don't know why my scissors are acting up. I need to work on those. So that the ends are about like this. I'm not going to worry too much about this part. And I need to flip the whole thing right side out. So I am going to use my lobster claw, sticking the rounded side up here into the tip. Get it worked up here. Come on. There you go. Close it up, move everything onto the other side. Almost, I had it twisted up there. Okay, and as soon as I see a little bit of fabric come through on that tip, I can open it up and pull it off. Okay, so let me go ahead and flip the other side. When I'm all done, I'm going to go to my ironing board and press it nice and flat. Okay, so once I pressed it, I just went ahead and edge stitched it all the way around, you know, so it'll lay nice and flat. And again, the instructions wanted you to interface this. I did not. I just, you know, left it as is. So my finished sash is 2 inches wide, and in the instructions they want you to go ahead and make some threaded loops for the sash to go through. So I'm going to grab my dress over here and we're going to put those in. Okay, so the instructions say they want you to make the thread carriers 1.5 inches long, but my sash itself is 2 inches. So if I make it 1.5, it's necessarily going to be bunched up just a bit. So, you know, just letting you know that's the instructions. So I'm going to put my rulers at 3/4 of an inch at this seam line right here, and right above it make a mark, and then make another mark 3/4 of an inch below, right there. Okay, so these are the 2 points that my thread carrier is going to be anchored to. I'm going to mark that on the other side also. I've got it threaded through. I'm just going to pull it all the way through here, and then once I've got it doubled and through my needle, I'm just going to bring them down here and knot it up. So basically I'm going to be sewing with 4 threads at once. Okay, let me grab a thimble. And from the back, I'm just going to come up. I'm going to put several stitches here, and coming up through that side and back down. I'm going to be alternating, probably putting a thread through one side then the other So then I went down that side. I'm going to come back up on the other side. So if you can see, I'm kind of straddling my little seam there because I want the pressure to be on both sides. Okay, so now if I come over here, I have 2 threads and they're each 4 threads wide. And I only have about 12 inches of thread sticking up. I'm not sure if that's enough. This may be a bad call, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I put my needle underneath both of the threads and pull until I just have a little loop showing. Put my needle through that loop and catch it. Okay, and it makes a little knot right there. And then go on and do it again. Pull it through the loop. And I'm basically making little buttonhole looking stitches all the way across, okay? So just keep on going. And it's not super necessary that they are all bunched up right on top of each other, but you just want to have it at least straddled all the way across here. So let me just keep going, see how we do, and I will be back shortly. Okay, so I've got it worked all the way across, not super tight because, you know, I didn't have a huge amount of thread. I would say if you start out with at least, you know, 24 inches length of thread, you'll be better off. But I think it's enough to hold a belt in. And when I iron this, my little marks will disappear. So I ended up just coming back through on this side. I'm gonna, you know, make a couple back stitchy type knots on this side here. One way, one the opposite way to lock it in here and clip my thread. So then I need to go ahead and do another loop just like this on the opposite side, iron it so that my marks disappear and put my little sash through there. Okay, so I've got my little belt going through my loops there. Like I said, it's a little bunchy because it's a ½ an inch shorter, but that's what they wanted, so we are good. I need to do the hem. So I'm going to come down here to the very bottom and I'm going to open it up here like so. I'm going to give myself, where is my ruler? Here you are. I'm going to give myself a 1 inch hem. I think that they call for a narrow hem. They say only a 5/8 inch hem. They want a very narrow hem. Well, you know what? We're going to do it. We're going to do 5/8 of an inch. So over my facing area, I am just lining up the edge of the cut fabric with the 5/8 inch mark on my ruler. And I'm going to draw a line right here. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Get some pins, stick a few pins here, and go ahead and just stitch straight across right here on that 5/8 inch line on both sides of my facings. You know what? I misread that. I just looked back at the instructions and they say to trim within 5/8 inch of your stitching line. So if you want a wider hem, you know, go ahead, you do you. I'm just going to go ahead since I already have the other side marked and 5/8 of an inch is a fine length for me. I'm going to go ahead and mark the same thing on this side. But, you know, if you wanted to do an inch hem, you'll just trim up to within 5/8 of an inch of this line. That's what they were trying to say. And if you have a curved hem, you know, this is a curved hem down here, the shorter your hem, the easier it's going to be to hem it. If it's a straight garment, a straight skirt, or a straight pant or something, you can just fold it up. You can go wider. But I'm going to do this. So again, let me go ahead and get these stitched. Okay, so that is stitched. I'm just going to come in here and clip out the bulk of that corner and flip this whole thing right side out. Like so. This will need to get pressed. Let me poke out that corner a little bit better with my handy dandy knitting needle here. I need to get my chopstick back up here. I missed that. Okay, so once I press it from the outside, it's going to have a nice edge like that. From the inside, once this is pressed, this edge will be ready just to turn up. Okay, I could turn it under again, so it's just a little 1/4 inch narrow hem, but I think that just leaving it straight up at 5/8 of an inch, I can press that so it's nice and flat, and then I'm just going to machine stitch it right along that edge. Okay, so I think we have volume here. This is it. I actually am very happy with the way this turned out. I know I hit that midpoint on this project, but I wasn't sure. I like it. Extremely comfortable. Look at that, the way that these sleeves are. For people like me who have sausage arms, it's not binding at all. It's a nice, comfortable sleeve. Glad I did the top pockets the way I did. These are kind of fun, and they're low enough that I think that it's fine. Now, there's a couple things I noticed. One, the pattern itself is made with a decent amount of ease in it. And sometimes I'm tempted to take that up, you know, and make it smaller just so it hugs the body a little bit more. But I didn't on here, and I'm glad I didn't, because the way that the buttons underneath are attached just to the facing, if it was too snug, it would have done that thing that I was worried about where it's going to roll open, you know, but it's not because of the ease that's built in. So make sure, even though it might seem like it's a little big, you leave that ease in. The other thing is I was trying to walk around so you can see, yeah, it's open down here, but it overlaps enough and the skirt is full enough. I don't feel like I'm in danger of flashing my thigh to the world, you know, which is good for me because middle-aged thigh. But, and the last thing is, like any wrap dress, you do have the possibility of a little more showing right here than you might be comfortable with. If you want to, you can always stick a snap or something under here. I'm just going to leave it. I think it's fine. I'm feeling a little daring today, so you know. But it overlaps enough. It overlaps more like a double-breasted than just meeting in the middle, so that I feel safe with it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know, I've done some projects where it's extremely low cut and I just can't handle it. I think that this is wrapping so that it meets at a point that's high enough in general that I feel comfortable with it, you know, not scandalous. I like the way that the two different colors go together. I like the flannel. There's just something so cozy about a flannel dress, especially this time of year. It snowed yesterday. Can't tell it now, but it did snow yesterday. So yeah, there we go. I hope you liked it, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn, then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses, the view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see, I'm living my bucolic life.